So welcome everyone. I know that we're coming, together from a couple of different time zones, and I'm Samira Khan. I'm with Salesforce.org. It's 6 a.m. my time here on the West Coast. So I think we'll have limited attendance from my side of the world today, but we'll certainly be distributing the recording after, so it'll be good to have this conversation. Just to give you a sense of who else is here with us, we have Melina Sanchez Montanes, and she is joining us from the World Economic Forum, the COVID Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs. Melina works at the intersection of social impact, finance, and policy. So she'll be telling us a little bit more about that. We also have with us Natalie Tan. She's the Director of Transformative Enterprises at Dignity for Children. And she can tell you a little bit more about her wonderful organization that I had the opportunity to actually visit. She's been with the organization for about 6 years now. Melina, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, what the forum is, how you came together, what the COVID Alliance is, how you came together, and what you're working on?
Sure, Samira, and thank you so much for bringing us together, especially today, which is a social enterprise day. And there is a lot to celebrate, but also a lot of work to be done, especially helping social entrepreneurs survive through COVID-19. So a little bit about the COVID Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs. We launched the Alliance around 6 months ago, and the goal is to support social enterprises during the crisis and its aftermath. Today, we have more than 80 organizations from around the world who stand by social enterprises as first responders to the crisis, but also as pioneers of a green and sustainable society and economic system. And this alliance is the first of its kind in the world. Jointly, through these more than 80 organizations, we support more than 50,000 social entrepreneurs around the world who touch 1 billion beneficiaries. And we work across continents, and we also work on every single sustainable development goal. And our ambition is as powerful as our reach. We want social entrepreneurs to be at the center of a reset of capitalism, specifically thinking about the most vulnerable communities. And our main tool to achieve this collective purpose is the COVID Alliance Action Agenda, which includes a series of action points for various stakeholders, including corporates like Salesforce, but also impact investors, intermediaries, government institutions, and funders. And we just embarked on phase 2 of the COVID Alliance, where our members are going to be spearheading certain outcome-oriented initiatives that serve our collective goal, and some of which are around mobilizing social entrepreneur ecosystems at the regional level, supporting social enterprises through non-financial resources, or even deploying capital in a more rapid way to make sure that they can survive these difficult months and even years ahead. So in a nutshell, that is what the COVID Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs is, and it's hosted, as you said, at the World Economic Forum.
Thanks, Melina. That's a great overview. And I'm just going to read actually a line from your bio that I think fits beautifully with the work of the COVID Alliance. So, Melina dreams of a more sustainable and inclusive future for all and works to reimagine how we build and invest in game changing people and companies. And I really think that's been the nature of the Alliance to date. So, thank you so much for that. Natalie, now over to you just for a brief introduction.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie and I work with the Dignity for Children Foundation. We're located in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And the work that we do is we work with marginalized and disadvantaged communities in the capital. We provide access to education to refugee communities and other communities who don't have access to education and other forms of like developmental activities. So we serve about 1,800 children each year, and this is our 22nd year of operating in KL.
Yeah, so before we kick off, just wanted to share a little bit more about what Salesforce.org does. So, Salesforce.org is one of the social impact business units at Salesforce at large. What we focus on is the technology for social change portfolio. So, how do we use our technology for good, and how do we bring it to bear on social sector challenges? We also support that work with our pro bono talent or our employees. So, as a result of that, I actually had the wonderful opportunity to connect with Melina before she joined the Alliance very briefly by phone because I was interested in her work at the intersection of sort of impact as well as venture capital or finance. So that was very interesting. We had that touch point, I remember. And then with Natalie, I actually had the opportunity to come to Kuala Lumpur before the pandemic to visit the wonderful enterprises that you have, ranging from, I remember there was a sewing business, a cafe, a school. So really would love to just get to the heart of it as I was thinking about, visiting the enterprises on the ground and how everything was running. I couldn't imagine what things would be like in the middle of a pandemic. So would love to just hear from you a little bit of your story and how things have changed as a result of the pandemic and what things really look like for you and your enterprises, as well as the people now during lockdown.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samira. And I do want to just say thank you so much for hosting this conversation, and bringing us together. So yes, like you mentioned, the foundation runs a number of social enterprises, and they're all parked under the foundation. They provide training to youth, and that's what happens when it's like a normal year. So this year was like completely anything but normal. So in Malaysia, I think it was about March when we suddenly transitioned to a very abrupt lockdown. And it was for 2 weeks, and then for another 2 weeks, and then it extended for I think almost 3 months, and it was quite severe. It was you're not allowed to leave the house, kind of a lockdown, so that there were very few. It was very hard to get out. So we immediately had to figure a way to keep the organization afloat. I mean, our first priority was how do you still continue to serve the marginalized community, the 1,800 children with us. So we had to immediately pivot to digital education. So in the best of times, learning using online tools can be a bit daunting for some, and you have to be set up for that. So that was quite a big pivot for us, but we shifted very rapidly and managed to get most of our kids. I think, if not mistaken, 80 to 90% of them. We partnered with corporations to get data and SIM cards, and try and get them onto Google Classrooms. So that was more for the education side. And it's still running up till now, almost 8 months later. We're still on that digital mode. In terms of the enterprises, that was really challenging, and something that we learned is that different industries, different businesses, they have a different response to the pandemic. So for example, our F&B, our cafe, we tried to remain open and try to continue serving as per normal, but we realized very quickly we couldn't do that. So we had to, get onto online platforms, start working much harder in our social media game, and just really find new ways of reaching customers because they weren't coming to us. So that was for the F&B. For the hair salon, that of course that was shut down immediately, and has remained almost closed until now because that's because of hygiene purposes. For the sewing business, that pivoted quite nicely. So that's run by we have a network of refugee women who sew both in our studio as well as from their homes. And we actually mobilized them like in the thick of the lockdown to start sewing protective gear. So in Malaysia, we had this huge deficit of protective gear for our frontliners, and there were hospitals up and down Malaysia where doctors were going in to serve COVID patients with actually no medical gear, and they had to fashion things out of like plastic bags, and it was just really 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 difficult for the frontliner situation. So we actually joined a network of other social enterprises to kind of have a response to the COVID situation without waiting for, necessarily waiting for the government or corporates to step in. So immediately we switched to fundraising and sewing personal protective gear, sewing masks in the thousands and distributing them. And that was really a very special time, because I think it showed us that the social enterprises do have a space in in the business. Well, they have a space and they have a role to play to respond to things like this. So yeah, I mean, we had to pivot, but we had to adapt really, really quickly. But yeah, I would say some adapted better than others. And maybe I'll just share one more. This is also sort of like it's in the intersection between business and education. So we actually managed to apply for funding to start satellite classrooms. So we realized that a lot of children who couldn't necessarily get onto a digital platform to access learning with us, they needed teachers to be there. So we actually trained and employed a number of women in different districts to set up small classrooms around the Klang Valley area and become like a hub for children to go and to obtain that learning if they couldn't do it digitally. So we found out that there are lots of ways to actually do education. And I think the COVID just pushed us to be more creative, to be more innovative, and to just work with what we had. So yeah, so those are some of the stories.
Yeah, no, thank you, Natalie. And I remember how impressed I was by the sheer number of enterprise businesses you had in one location. Sort of, it was set up with the sewing business next to the cafe, next to the school. So I really wanted you here. So just taking a step back, could you tell us a little bit more about your social enterprise model so people understand sort of the scale of it? And then would love to just hear a little bit more about some of these supports and partnerships that you mentioned, because I imagine that this pivot took the help of other organizations. So just curious if you could dig into sort of the supports piece after sharing a little bit more about how your model works amongst the enterprises and who it serves.
Sure. Yes, of course. Thank you. Sorry, I guess I should have given a bit more of a context. So our foundation runs our learning center, which serves the 1,800 children aged 3 to 18. And alongside that, we have about 5 different social enterprises, and they were all started up with the purpose of providing a training platform for our youth. So the cafe, we teach F&B skills. Sewing, we teach design thinking and sewing skills. And all of the social enterprises also teach basic entrepreneurship skills to youth. And at the same time, they are providing jobs to the community. And, the business also generates income, which goes back to the foundation. So the whole concept is education and business coming together in a local community and working like in an integrated fashion. So they don't exist outside of the school. It's all in one model. um, in response to your second question about the partnerships that we had, we had to rely and like get a lot of partners on board, definitely, both for funds, for like cash funds. We had a lot of corporations who got on board with food aid distribution, large size corporations. We had embassies coming in. We had some international organizations who were also giving us funds. We had telecom companies who gave us data and SIM cards to reach the children and to make sure they could log on digitally. And we also had to work very closely with other social enterprises because they were all in the same boat, and so we had a lot of resources that we could share. So yes, you're definitely right. We had to do a lot of collaborative work. It would not have been possible alone.
Yeah, no, that's very encouraging. And it sounds like it was a sort of a mature and innovative endeavor. Melina, just sort of, turning it over to you, would love to hear some of the trends that you're hearing from enterprises that you're working with through the Alliance, and which aspects of what Natalie shared sort of mirror and match that, and which aspects are very different, because I'm involved as well, but you're sort of deep in the weeds with the various enterprises. So would love to hear some trends from you.
Sure. And the story that Natalie shared is inspiring. There are some social entrepreneurs that we're working with that have been able to pivot. Some of are even thriving during the pandemic because they already had digital business models. But the matter of fact is that there are a lot of social enterprises that are struggling, that are barely surviving, and that need our help. So this is a call for action for all those social entrepreneurs that need our help right now. And in terms of trends, I think that there are three major trends that as a COVID Alliance we are seeing, and three ways that we can support them. So the first one is basically supporting them through both financial and non-financial resources so that they can stay afloat during the pandemic. As Natalie said, a lot of these social enterprises are on the front line. They are literally delivering services and products to vulnerable communities, to people that don't have anything right now, that are not being supported by the respective governments. So they have a critical role to play. And it is our role also to support them, to continue supporting these vulnerable communities. To give you an example, for example, in India, there are more than 140 million people who have, migrant workers specifically, who had to migrate because of the lack of livelihood opportunities. And there is this one social enterprise that has been very prominent within the COVID Alliance, Jansa has, who in collaboration with other partners in India have supported more than 10 million of these migrant families by providing them food, emergency transportation, legal support, and other type of support. But it's not just one organization. There are a lot more organizations that are servicing vulnerable communities that might not be as lucky as Jansa has or as Dignity, that need support to pivot their business models, to reimagine their strategy and reimagine how they do business. And for that, they require not only support, but also cross-sector collaboration. And I think that's also very important, both for you, Samira, as a representative of Salesforce, but also Natalie, who has been partnering with different corporates and different organizations, because this is exactly what we are trying to do at the COVID Alliance, right? We are trying to bring all these stakeholders from the corporate world, from the impact investing world, from the government world, to support social enterprises on the front line. And I would love to hear, later, Samira, about your work within the non-financial support group of the COVID Alliance, and how do you think that Salesforce can deliver, these services and this support that these enterprises need. So this is one, how to ensure that social enterprises stay afloat during the pandemic and beyond. The second one is identifying local solutions for local challenges. So the COVID Alliance, it's a bit of a top-down approach to ensuring that the social enterprise sector continues thriving during these difficult times. But there are a lot of local actors that know these social entrepreneurs on the ground, that are in direct contact with them, and who know much better than us what they need. So to give you an example, one of our Alliance members, Agora Partnership, recently launched as an organization that is similar to the COVID Alliance, but for the Latin American context specifically. And it's called Emprendedores Frente al COVID. Entrepreneurs facing COVID. And the aim is to, similar to the Alliance, to coordinate and align efforts of these regional stakeholders in Latin America to support social enterprises. So our hope is that more of these organizations and cross-sector efforts start emerging at a local context, because they are the ones at the end of the day who have the specific knowledge to support these social entrepreneurs. And this adds to the already more than 80 organizations, as I said before, that are working across the globe as part of the COVID Alliance. And I would say that the third big trend is, in addition to ensuring that social entrepreneurs stay afloat, and also localizing our efforts to bring social enterprises into the mainstream. And this goes beyond the pandemic. It is how we reimagine our systems, our socioeconomic systems, to integrate social enterprises. So for example, in a corporate context, and this might be relevant for Salesforce as well, how can we bring social enterprises into value and supply chains of corporates? Or how can we ensure that social enterprises are at the center of reimagining and working towards creating decent jobs out of the pandemic, which is a priority of many governments right now. And also, to give you an example, the European Union will set 2021 as the social economy year. So there is a big opportunity to position the social entrepreneurship sector as part of that recovery effort. So those are the major trends that I've seen, but I would love to hear from you also, Samira, how you've been engaging with the Alliance, how do you see some of the work we are doing to support social entrepreneurs on the ground through, for example, the non-financial support group, and what value this adds to you as an organization.
Thank you so much, Melina, for sharing those trends. I mean, I heard a couple of themes that are very important to our work, especially around non-financial support, and that resonate with me. I mean, one, the role that the maturity of the organization has to play to this notion of supports and finding a place for the social enterprise that may be different than what we've historically known social enterprises to play, or finding a different role for them in the model or the ecosystem, this notion of joint learning, the importance of networks. So just taking a step back, at salesforce.org, our current commitment toward the Alliance is first around technology. So we have a Power of Us Hub program by which we offer our nonprofit organizations 10 free licenses and discounted product, and they can scale up from there. So we are extending that offer obviously to the Alliance members and also to the networks and their members as well, who are a part of the Alliance. So that's one piece. The second is then thinking about how can we help these organizations get up and started with the technology. And those are for organizations who haven't previously been using Salesforce technology. Those who already are, we're also offering that pro bono support to help them sort of build upon the technology and meet their needs during this sort of critical and acute period of time. In addition to that, we've thought about other ways to engage our employees to provide sort of business skills support, support with such as financing, marketing, and other such things. And so I would say the key challenge though remains. So my experience has been, with the smaller social enterprises, as you mentioned, Melina, first and foremost, they are cash strapped. They do not have the resources to even sort of run their business, say, beyond the next 6 months. So for them to even think about technology becomes second order or third order. So for me, it's sort of an intellectual challenge, as well as a model challenge, as well as sort of a heartbreaking sort of situation where I see such innovative models that may not survive beyond 6 months to a year because they don't have the cash. So that's an open question in my mind. How do we fill that gap? And then sort of secondly, in terms of the maturity of the organization, even when it's not about finances, sometimes it's about comfort, with technology, having dedicated resources or the capacity to actually support that technology. So these are some of the challenges that I'm sort of hearing and facing when those I reach out to are digging into their portfolios and talking to their enterprise companies. So that whole discovery bit is difficult. So there's the financing bit, the capacity building bit, and then the whole process of discovery. So my mind automatically goes to, well, long term, how can we scale a model of support, especially as a corporation, given it's been so hard to identify the needs of the entrepreneurs and get them what they need to get up and running, especially with something like technology. But I think what the Alliance has done is it's provided a very good sort of cohort with which to learn as well as to pool assets and resources. And as you mentioned, Melina, it's across sectors. You have the impact investors, you have the networks of enterprises, and you have the corporations. So I'm keen to see where that goes and how we think about sort of model change, because I'm optimistic. I would like to be. I hope that this pandemic will come to an end in the near future. And I view this pivotal moment as an opportunity to think about how do we change the business model, as you mentioned? How do we create a space that's replicable for the social enterprise so that we can continue to provide them the supports that they need, see that ecosystem thrive? But not only that, how do we learn from the enterprises? You mentioned how they have insight into community, and how do we learn from their solutions? Again, blown away by what Natalie shared in terms of the sort of pivot that they did. How do we make those types of learnings more available to some of the smaller social enterprises and enable them? And then how do we as a large company learn from the innovation and creativity and bring it back into the ecosystem? Recently, I was working on a piece about change making culture. I do think there's something there where corporations have a lot to learn from the sort of resilience and, for lack of better words, the scrappiness and innovativeness of social enterprises. They have no choice but to innovate. So that's kind of where I am. I view it as a challenging situation, keen to see where we take it. And it's also sort of an opportunity. So, Natalie, I mean, just back over to you. I mean, given what you've heard from Melina and myself, like, how can the Alliance be helpful to you? If you had a wish list, like, I'm not saying it's possible, but if you had a wish list from these corporations or organizations, what would that look like?
That's such a good question. I definitely think this alliance is such a great and proactive step into to the right direction. Like you said, even though we hope that the pandemic will end sometime in the near future, I mean, this is a really good step forward to having more collaboration. And yeah, a wish list quite extensive, but I think based on what you've been sharing, firstly is you're right. A lot of social enterprises are really cash strapped. Like we can't even see beyond 3 months, right? So I think a lot of organizations, they want to help, they want to give cash, but they want to see results. They want a KPI attached to it. They want some sort of impact reporting. I think it's not necessarily feasible for a lot of social enterprises to give those kind of promises at this point. So I think some sort of like grants just to get us through this hump, this next few months, I think that would be really, really helpful. Not just for us, I think for a lot of the social enterprises. I think also maybe the technology to support the pivot, and it doesn't necessarily have to be really, really fancy technology. I mean, a lot of social entrepreneurs, we're on the ground, we're not necessarily all like, tech whizzes. Like for example, even just our teachers trying to switch over to a digital platform, there was this whole scramble to try and figure out which platform was the best. Was it Teachable? Was it, Khan Academy? And I think sometimes just having mentors or, people in the tech industry who can just gently point us to the most practical or pragmatic solutions, even that would be just such a big help trying to, be more technologically savvy, or to find ways that work for us. We just need something that works sometimes. It doesn't have to be the most like, fantastic solution. So that's one. I think also we do need a lot of business support for marketing and rebranding products. So for example, just for the F&B, trying to switch from dine-in to food delivery or frozen food, all of that requires rethinking, not just of logistics, but definitely of like marketing, how to reach out to a new target audience, rebranding. Definitely, I think we could use that business, support to try and figure out, new strategies. Yeah, I think those would be the three main things, yeah, that I can think of.
Yeah, I know those are significant. And I've been thinking about the capital continuum these days, like going all the way from catalytic capital to a different type of capital that may be needed to scale as we think about corporations and impact investors. And one thing I didn't mention is that I actually sit on the team focused on impact measurement and management at .org. And so I fully appreciate how difficult it may be to get sort of outcomes and even narratives during this period where you're just trying to sort of run your business. The last thing on your mind is might be this notion of impact reporting or sort of identifying what key outcomes are. So that was very, very helpful. With that, we did want to leave some time for questions as well. And my call to action on my end is just for you to check out the Alliance. I will drop the link in chat, and would love to turn it over to Melina actually for sort of a broader call to action as well.
Yeah, thank you, Samira and Natalie, for your insights. Definitely check out the COVID Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs website, but also we have a call for action to all stakeholders that are working on this sector that might not be part of the Alliance directly, but can also benefit from our community events, from learning what we're doing, from collaborating with some of our partners. So I'm also posting here on the chat our call for action where you can register and be connected with us.
Great. And just wanted to see if anybody had any questions. We wanted to keep the actual spoken sort of portion or speaking portion of the panel limited to 30 minutes and wanted to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, but we can also sort of wrap this up early. So do we have any questions from any of the panelists? Please go ahead and put it in chat. And I can also even unmute you if you'd like to sort of make any comments. I'll give it a minute.
In the meantime, I can definitely ask a question that has come up over and over when discussing non-financial support. And this is specifically for Natalie. So a lot of our social enterprises, or the ones that we're trying to support, they prioritize obviously capital, they prioritize strategic pivots, and some of them talk about mental health support, but they don't prioritize it because it's not core, to the survival of the business, so they don't think about it in that way. I was wondering what your take is on that. How are your employees and your stakeholders thinking about mental health as you try to pivot, as you go through these very difficult times for your business?
Wow, that's such an important question, right? Mental health. And you're right, I think from this perspective, like we know it's important, but at the same time, trying to survive, it's important, but at the same time, it's not like maybe not your first priority. What we've done, Dignity, we have partners and people who are in like this kind of field. So we've like, for example, one of our best volunteers, she's Malaysia's first KonMari consultant. So she was running like online webinars for our staff, like, okay, during the season, how can you make the most of it? How can you KonMari your house? How can you do like mental like health checks? So I think while we may not necessarily have had the capacity to know how to deal with it, we tried to bring people on board to run sessions with our staff. Also, just I think working from home, we did have a lot of sessions with our supervisors trying to get them to support the teams that were working under them. Like, okay, how do you do work from home in a way that, we want to be productive, but at the same time, we want to acknowledge this is a difficult and different season for all of us. And so we had to have a lot of conversations around that. But we did. I think for me, the biggest help was actually reaching out to people in the mental health sphere and inviting them to come and give their input. Because sometimes for an organization to try and for a small organization, a social enterprise, for us to try and figure out how to keep things afloat as well as take care of mental health when I don't necessarily have the expertise, that can be really hard. So we reach out, we tap into those networks, and we try and get people to input into us. And
I actually have a question for you, Natalie, as well, around just the nature of the mix of partnerships and sort of support you've received, local versus global. I know the Alliance is a very global group, and I've been excited by what we can bring to the table. But I also appreciate that, it's sometimes hard to mobilize such a global group, and it's sometimes hard to mobilize international players. So curious about sort of the mix of supports you've received during this time, if they're mainly local or if some are international.
Mostly local, actually. Mostly Local, we have had individual donors who were already in our donor database who were donating from like Singapore, Australia, and America, but those are few. Um, I think because we ran a lot of fundraising campaigns centered around, okay, providing food, meeting the immediate needs of the poor community in KL. So the local, local donor base, the local community rose up to meet that call to action because they could immediately identify. We have had one or two grants approved during the season that came from international organizations, but that was not COVID related. That was just like regular grants. So mostly local.
And are there any sort of social enterprises that you've seen sort of struggling and not pivot as well as you have? And what would you say is sort of the key to your success? And I see we have also a question in the chat after that.
That's a really good question. Yeah, actually, a lot of social enterprises, a lot of SMEs have shut. I think, if I'm not mistaken, a news article said last week, I think 35,000 SMEs have shut as of last week. So a lot have not been able to pivot. But I think something that helps us is we've already had a very strong donor network. We also responded very, very quickly. I mean, our two founders are very quick to respond to these kind of things. So actually, the day we locked down, the day the whole country went into lockdown, the next day we had a video going out, a video appeal. I think we were actually the first NGO/social enterprise to change. Okay, people are not going to give for education. They're not even going to give for digital education. They're going to give for food. They're going to give for basic necessities. So we actually ran a video, and within the first week, we had a bank, an insurance company. They didn't know where to give the money because people were not ready to receive the funds, but because they had seen the materials that we put out, they were like, okay, here's how many 100,000 ringgit. What can you do with it? Can you send it to families who need it? So I think having good leadership and being able to think of ways that are outside of what you usually do, we respond. That helped us to respond really fast.
Yeah, I'm almost hearing a need for some advisory support for some.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
So Samira, let me take the question that Fernando posted here on the chat because it's very relevant to the COVID Alliance. And Fernando is saying that there are a lot of small enterprises that need funding, but don't have the resources or the capacity to go through all the requirements that investors require from them. So what are and I'm gonna interpret it in a broader way, what are the different ways that social enterprises can tap to rapid capital, not necessarily bypassing, but making these requirements a little bit easier. And this is something that from the impact investor side of the COVID Alliance is very important. It is indeed one of the action points that impact investors have laid out within the COVID Alliance action agenda, because there is a need for funding and there are a lot of social enterprises who have raised that concern. But how can we make it easier for them to actually be able to receive that capital? So a specific example of an initiative that has come out of one of our Alliance members, specifically this member is the Roddenberry Foundation, and they launched the +1 Global Fund. They are using a model of trusted networks, so that there are even no applications for social enterprises that require additional capital. So what that means is that there might be social enterprises who have received funding from the Acumens of the world or the Union Social Businesses of the world. They already have gone through due diligence processes. So by using these trusted networks, this specific foundation is able to basically provide even more funding to social enterprises that need it without all these requirements that are part of these very stringent and lengthy due diligence processes. So that's one example, but I'm sure there are many more out there.
Thank you, Melina. And, I know Natalie said that she's having computer issues. She may have to drop off soon. So I would love for actually Natalie to close it out. I know, Melina mentioned how to engage with the Alliance. I sort of shared my request that you check out the Alliance. Natalie, any sort of parting words you want to leave the group with, whether in terms of inspiration, a call to action, or a request that you have of the broader group?
Um, well, first, yeah, thank you so much for organizing this again. And yes, I'm so sorry, I do have issues with my computer. But I suppose one thing that I could share is that when our social enterprise, like I'm speaking specifically for the sewing studio, when we started pivoting, actually we didn't even think of the pivot. The pivot came to us. There were other social enterprises who reached out and said, hey, we're going to respond to the COVID situation. We're going to start sewing PPE, and you can use this as a fundraising opportunity. So that came to us. And then I started connecting with different ones, and I got plugged into like 4 or 5 different WhatsApp groups. I had no idea that there were so many people out there who were doing amazing work, and I think sometimes it's hard to be alone and to struggle through this, but if you put your feelers out, there's almost always somebody out there who's doing something similar to what you do or who wants to support. So I think networking is very important during this time. It seems like it's an intangible activity, it's maybe you feel like you don't have the time for it, but honestly, if you have the right networks and you just reach out, things go so much better for you. So I really encourage all the social entrepreneurs to just look around and see what's happening in your community, in the next district. You'll be surprised at what you find, I think.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And, thank you so much for joining us, Natalie. Melina, I'll leave it to you to sort of close out and say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you again, Samira, for bringing us together during the Social Enterprise Day. Thank you, Natalie, for all your insights. These are the stories that we want to support and hear more of and amplify your voice. Because at the end of the day, the Alliance is a collection of organizations that work for you, right? But you are the ones on the front line that are doing the real work. And we want to make sure that your voices are heard.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.